Hello guys, in this video I'll be showing you how to replace the auxiliary power PCB in a JBL Extreme speaker. Now if you're looking for this part, we can provide you one on our website. If you're looking for this part, we also service this repair as well. If you would like to send it in, it's a pretty straightforward repair. It doesn't take too long and requires a minimal amount of tools and no soldering necessary. So be sure to pick it up if you're looking for one. And let's get going with the repair. Let's grab our speaker, flip it over to the back side, and start with the seams. Let's get a pry tool and pry back on the seams. I usually start by prying on the seam opposite of the JBL logo, as this part does not have a screw holding it. Now we have two Phillips head screws. Let's remove those. Now that the two screws are removed, go ahead and just push out on this fabric grill. You can do that to both sides. Flip the unit over and pull off this fabric grill cover. Now let's go ahead and remove three Phillips head screws on the inside of the zipper cover here. Once you have removed the three Phillips head screws, you can go ahead and start prying along this edge here to take the cover off. Now we have 8 Phillips head screws holding the battery cover. Once we have removed all of the Phillips head screws holding the battery cover, we can go ahead and push up on it. Push up like so. Last thing connected to it is the fuel gauge LEDs. There's two smaller Phillips heads that it's held on by. Pull it out. Next, here's our auxiliary power PCB. Let's go ahead and remove the 3 Phillips head screws that is held down by. Now that we've freed up the 3 Phillips head screws, we can go ahead and try to just pry it up a little bit, free it up. Next, let's go ahead and remove both side passive radiators, as the connectors of this board are on either side. After you've removed one Phillips head screw on the inside here holding the passive radiator, there's now going to be a set of 5 more Phillips head screws along the edge here. Let's get those removed. Now that we've removed all of these screws, we can go ahead and pull off this passive radiator. Please note that there is a gasket seal that runs along the outside rim of this passive radiator. To not lose it, you could adjust it into place if it does come out of its slot here. Now, as you can see, here's one of the connection cables. We can go ahead and unplug it. And the other one is right in there, if you can see that. Go ahead and grab something you could use to unplug it. There we go. Now that we have unplugged that connector, we can try to go ahead and free up this part of the PCB. Just weave the connectors through the opening. Here's our first connector, it's pulled out. Let's get the other one. We got this side fully out. Now be sure not to damage this Bluetooth antenna that is located here, or the mic. We do sell these parts if you do break it or damage it. So you should have these parts in stock. Next, let's go ahead and remove the other side passive radiator the same way that we removed the first side, starting with the Phillips head on the inside here. Get the 5 Phillips head screws on the side here. Now you can slowly remove the passive radiator, making sure that the gasket seal is still in place. Finally, here's our last connector right here, holding the PCB power auxiliary board in place. Remove it and wiggle it free from the unit. Sometimes you might have to peel away this foam covering here. It gets in the way. This connector is twisted to one side, so be sure to take note of that if you're having difficulty pulling it out. There we go. We have pulled out the auxiliary power PCB. In many cases, this board will get corroded. Any of these ports could break, fail. So this will be a good part to replace if that occurs. Now let's go ahead and install it back into the unit as if this is one that you would have purchased. It will look exactly like this. Let's start by feeding all these connectors back into these openings here. Once this connector is far enough in to where it could get plugged back in, go ahead and do so. Now let's go to the other side and feed these 2 connectors back into place. Be careful again not to break any components that are on the board. That might be easy to knock off. Once this first connector is far enough to where it could be connected into its proper spot, go ahead and do so. It might be a little tricky at first, but just mess with it a little bit. If you need to use a screwdriver to help guide it, that might be a good idea. Now that I've finally connected this first connector in place, this is probably the longest part of the repair. We're ready to do the next one. This one should be far easier. Now that all connections have been made, you can go ahead and fit this board back into position and screw in the 3 screws here that hold it in place. They will be the smaller length Phillips head screws here. Alright, now that this part is in place, we can go ahead and install both of these side passive radiators into place. Before you put it in, make sure you see that this gasket seal is nice in its place on the rim here. go ahead and insert the first screw on the inside here. Next, we will be fastening the 5 Phillips head screws that go on along the edge here. Now let's go ahead and install the other side passive radiator. Be sure that the gasket seal is in place, and get all of the screws, starting with the one inside here, back into place. Now the top 5. Finally, we got both of the passive radiators back into their spots. We can go ahead and start by getting the battery cover back into place. Let's get the fuel gauge LEDs and fasten them back to this cover. Now there is this kind of black goo holding or keeping this gap here sealed where the fuel gauge ribbon comes out of. If you see that, if there's a hole here that it has formed, just form back this goo to not allow any air to leak out. Now let's get the 8 Phillips head screws back into place. Now let's get this zipper cover back in place. Just go ahead and clip in this side and clip this side in, and in this pouch here, secure it with the 3 Phillips head screws. Finally, we can grab our fabric grill cover and put it in place. Just align this hole cutout with the button. There's a couple tabs here that slide into this grill. Just align it, clip it into place, and screw in the last 2 screws holding the grill cover.